In the middle of the luxurious Leonard's restaurant, a billionaire was working hard, unaware that his deaf son was suffering, desperately signaling for drinks and dessert. Luckily, a shy black waitress quickly stepped forward, gently placed a small chocolate cake in front of the boy, and gestured with her hand to say 3 words that made the boy's face light up. That action immediately caught the billionaire's attention, and the moment he looked up, her life changed forever. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The kitchen doors swung open, and Naomi Carter stepped into the dining room with a tray balanced on her left hand. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from the weight, but from something deeper. 3 years of hiding does that to you. She'd learned to make herself invisible here at Leonard's. Keep your head down, smile when necessary, and for God's sake, don't let anyone see who you really are. Columbia MBA. Forget it. CPA certification buried. Here she was, just another server in a black apron, refilling water glasses and pretending the weight of her past didn't press against her chest every single day. Table 12 needs attention. Linda Parker, the floor manager, appeared beside her with that look, the one that said, "Rich people are waiting, move faster." The Blackwood Reservation. Don't screw this up, Naomi. Naomi nodded, smoothing her apron. The Blackwood Reservation. She'd heard the name whispered around the restaurant all week. Ethan Blackwood, billionaire. The kind of man who could buy Leonard's with what he spent on watches. She approached table 12, located in the corner, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Fifth Avenue. The evening light cut through the glass, landing on 2 figures, a man in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and a young boy picking at the tablecloth with restless fingers. "Your server will be—" she started, but the man's voice cut through her words like a knife. "We'll have the Dover sole. 2 orders, asparagus no butter." He didn't look up from his phone. His tone was flat, transactional, like he was ordering office supplies instead of dinner. Naomi's jaw tightened. She'd served hundreds of men like this, men who thought money meant they didn't need manners. Of course, and for the young man, he'll have the same. The boy, maybe 10 years old, looked up at her then, and something in his eyes made her pause. There was a sadness there, the kind that doesn't belong on a kid's face. He opened his mouth as if to protest, then closed it again, his shoulders sagging. Ethan Blackwood still hadn't looked at her. His attention remained fixed on his screen thumb, scrolling with mechanical precision. That's all. That's all. Like she was a vending machine. Like his son wasn't sitting right there silent and ignored. Naomi should have walked away, should have smiled, nodded, disappeared back into her role. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way the boy's hands moved to his lap, fingers twitching in a pattern she recognized. She'd seen that before. Sign language. He was signing to himself. Her heart kicked against her ribs. 3 years of hiding, and this was the moment she was going to blow it over a kid she didn't even know. The boy's fingers moved again, slower, this time more deliberate. He was spelling something. H-E-L-P. Jesus Christ. Naomi turned and walked toward the dessert station. Her mind was screaming at her to stop, to stay invisible, but her feet kept moving. She grabbed a small plate and carefully placed a slice of chocolate lava cake on it, the one with the molten center that Lucas hadn't ordered, would never have been allowed to order. When she returned to table 12, she set it down directly in front of the boy, not his father. The kid's eyes widened. He looked at the cake, then at her, confusion flickering across his face. Naomi's hands moved before her brain could stop them. Slowly, deliberately, she signed, "For you. You looked hungry." The transformation was instant. The boy's entire face lit up like someone had flipped a switch. His hands flew into motion, signing back with desperate enthusiasm. "You know sign language." Then, with pure joy radiating from his small frame, "You signed so beautifully. Where did you learn?" The words came out before she could stop them. "I studied linguistics at Columbia." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Ethan Blackwood's head snapped up. For the first time since she'd approached the table, he actually looked at her. Really looked. His eyes were dark gray, sharp as broken glass, and they pinned her in place with an intensity that made her stomach drop. Columbia. He stood, and suddenly the space between them felt too small. He was tall, probably 6'2", and the way he moved reminded her of a predator circling prey. Linguistics at Columbia. Lucas was signing something, pulling at his father's sleeve, but Ethan ignored him. His attention was locked on Naomi, like she was a puzzle he needed to solve. His hand shot out, fingers wrapping around her wrist, not rough, but firm enough that she couldn't pull away without making a scene. "What else are you hiding?" Her pulse hammered against his grip. Up close, she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, could smell his cologne, something expensive and woody that probably had a French name she couldn't pronounce. "I'm not," she started, but her voice cracked. "You are." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Columbia doesn't take linguistics students who end up serving tables at Leonard's. Not unless something went very, very wrong." His grip tightened just a fraction. "What's your full name?" She could lie. She should lie. But something about the way he was looking at her, like he could see straight through every wall she'd built, made the truth bubble up. "Naomi Carter." He repeated it slowly, like he was committing it to memory. "Naomi Carter." His thumb pressed against her pulse point, and she knew he could feel how fast her heart was racing. "I'm going to find out what you're running from." Then he released her wrist and stepped back, his expression unreadable. "I'll see you next week, Naomi Carter." It wasn't a question. It was a promise. Lucas was signing frantically now. I'm sorry, his small face twisted with guilt. But Ethan had already turned away, one hand on his son's shoulder, guiding him toward the exit. Naomi stood frozen at table 12, her wrist still burning where he'd touched her. Around her, the restaurant continued its evening rhythm, silverware clinking, conversations flowing, but all she could hear was her own pulse pounding in her ears. 3 years. She'd stayed hidden for 3 years, and Ethan Blackwood had just seen everything. The $100 bills sat on Linda's desk like an accusation. $200. Linda picked up the cash, fanning it between her fingers. For a 30-minute dinner they barely touched. She looked at Naomi with eyes that had seen too many years in the service industry to be impressed by anything. Rich people don't tip like this unless they want something. Naomi's throat felt tight. She stood in the cramped manager's office, still wearing her apron, still able to feel the ghost of Ethan Blackwood's fingers around her wrist. He was just being generous. Generous. Linda let out a harsh laugh and dropped the money back on the desk. "Honey, I've worked at Leonard's for 15 years. Men like Ethan Blackwood, they don't do generous. They do transactions." She leaned back in her chair, studying Naomi with the kind of attention that made her want to run. "What happened out there?" "Nothing. His son is deaf, and I know some sign language, so You what? Had a conversation made an impression?" Linda's voice softened, but not in a comforting way, in a warning way. "Naomi, listen to me. People like us, we have rules we follow. Clock in, smile, serve, clock out. People like him, they don't follow any rules at all." She stood walking around the desk until she was close enough that Naomi could smell her perfume. Something floral and cheap. "Whatever you think happened out there, whatever connection you think you made, forget it. Men like Blackwood eat girls like you for breakfast and don't even remember your name by lunch." Naomi's jaw clenched. She wanted to argue, wanted to say that Linda didn't understand. But the problem was, Linda understood perfectly. "I should get back to my tables." "Yeah," Linda waved her away. "You should." Naomi pushed through the office door and nearly collided with another server. The kitchen was chaos, orders being shouted, plates clattering the air thick with heat and grease. She grabbed her order pad and dove back into the rhythm, trying to lose herself in the familiar pattern of work. But her mind wouldn't cooperate. It kept circling back to those gray eyes, that voice, the way he'd said her name, like he was planning to dissect it later. "I'm going to find out what you're running from." Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She ignored it, walked to table 7, took their drink orders, smiled when they made a joke about the weather. Normal. Everything had to stay normal. The phone buzzed again. She made it through another hour before she finally checked. Unknown number. Her stomach dropped before she even opened the message. "I got your number from HR. Hope you don't mind." Her fingers went numb. He'd called HR. How did he even... Another message appeared. "Actually, I do hope you mind. It means you're paying attention. EB." Naomi stared at the screen. The casual arrogance of it made her want to throw her phone across the kitchen. He'd invaded her privacy, pulled strings she didn't even know existed, and he was making jokes about it. She should delete the messages, block the number, pretend this never happened. Instead, she found herself typing, "This is inappropriate." 3 dots appeared immediately. He was waiting. Actually waiting for her response, like he had nothing better to do than text a random waitress. So is hiding a Columbia education behind a serving apron. "We all have our secrets, Naomi." The way he used her name like he'd earned the right to it made her skin prickle. She shoved her phone back in her pocket and tried to focus on her tables, but the messages kept burning in her mind. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. She took orders, delivered food, smiled until her face hurt, but underneath it all was a gnawing anxiety that wouldn't let go. By the time she clocked out at 11, her hands were shaking again. Linda caught her at the employee exit. "You okay? You've been off all night." "I'm fine." The lie came automatically. "Just tired." "Right." Linda didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. "Get some rest." "And Naomi, whatever's going on with Blackwood, be careful. Men like that, they're dangerous even when they think they're being kind." Naomi nodded and pushed through the door into the cold November air. The street was quieter now, most of the dinner crowd long gone. She pulled her coat tighter and started walking toward the subway. Her phone buzzed again. She almost didn't check it. Almost. "And next time we meet, maybe you can tell me about Paris." The world tilted sideways. Paris. She'd never mentioned Paris. Not to him. Not to anyone at Leonard's. Not to her breath caught. Derek. Derek knew about Paris, about the 6 months she'd spent there, doing research about the project that had become her life's work before he'd stolen it, which meant Ethan Blackwood had already started digging, had already found connections she'd thought were buried. Naomi stopped walking. Right there on the sidewalk, surrounded by the distant noise of the city, she stopped and forced herself to think, to really think about what was happening. Ethan Blackwood wasn't just curious, he was investigating her. And if he kept digging, if he followed the trail far enough back, he'd find Derek Collins, he'd find Pinnacle Financial, he'd find the whole ugly story of how she'd gone from Columbia MBA to hiding in plain sight. And then what? What would a billionaire do with that information? Her phone buzzed one more time. No message this time, just a news alert from the business section. Pinnacle Financial announces merger with Blackwood Industries deal, expected to close Q1. The phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering on the concrete. She stared at it, the screen still glowing with those impossible words. Pinnacle Financial, Derek's company, the company built on her stolen work, her stolen patents, her stolen future, merging with Blackwood Industries, which meant Ethan Blackwood and Derek Collins were about to become partners. Oh God. Oh no. Naomi bent down and picked up her phone with shaking hands. The screen had cracked a spider web of fractures spreading from the corner, but the article was still readable. She scrolled through it, her vision blurring, looking for some detail that would make this make sense. There, near the bottom, the merger valued at $847 million will combine Blackwood's infrastructure holdings with Pinnacle's breakthrough financial technology platforms. Financial technology platforms, that was her work, her algorithms, her code, her 3 years of research that Derek had repackaged and claimed as his own. And now Ethan Blackwood was buying it, buying her stolen life without even knowing it. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. She stood there on the sidewalk, the cold seeping through her coat, and felt the careful walls she'd built over 3 years start to crumble. She'd thought she was safe, thought she could hide forever if she just stayed small enough, quiet enough, invisible enough. But Ethan Blackwood had seen her, and now he was connected to the one person she'd been running from all along. The steps of Lowe Memorial Library looked exactly the same. Naomi sat on the cold stone, her coffee going lukewarm in her hands, and tried to remember the last time she'd been here. 3.5 years ago, maybe. Before Derek, before everything fell apart, back when she'd actually believed her education meant something. "You're early." She didn't turn around. She'd know that voice anywhere now, smooth, controlled, with an edge underneath that suggested he was used to getting exactly what he wanted. "You said noon. It's noon." Ethan Blackwood walked around and sat down beside her, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could see he wasn't wearing a suit this time. Just jeans, expensive ones probably, and a cashmere sweater that made him look almost human. Almost. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure either." She took a sip of her coffee and immediately regretted it. Cold and bitter. "But then I figured if you went to the trouble of stalking me, hacking into HR, and texting me about Paris, you'd probably just show up at my apartment anyway." His mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. "I don't stalk. I investigate." "Right. And what exactly are you investigating, Mr. Blackwood?" "Ethan." He stretched his legs out in front of him, looking entirely too comfortable on the freezing stone steps. "And you know what I'm investigating. You're running from something. Someone. Something specific enough that you'd bury a Columbia MBA and work as a server rather than use your real credentials." The accuracy of it made her chest tight. She set her coffee down between them and wrapped her arms around herself. "Maybe I'd just like serving food. Maybe. He turned to look at her, and those gray eyes were sharp enough to cut. Or maybe someone destroyed your career so thoroughly that you're afraid to even put your real name on a job application. Naomi's breath caught. How did he? I'm good at what I do, Naomi. Very good. And what I do is figure out when people are lying, when they're hiding something, when there's a story underneath the story. He leaned back on his hands, still watching her. You want to know what I found when I looked you up? No. The word came out too fast. Too bad. I'm going to tell you anyway. He tilted his head, studying her like she was a balance sheet he was trying to reconcile. Naomi Carter, Columbia class of 2021, MBA with a focus on financial systems and technology, graduated top of your class, published 2 papers on algorithmic trading before you even had your degree. Then you disappeared. No LinkedIn, no job history, nothing. Like you fell off the face of the earth. She couldn't look at him anymore. Couldn't stand the way he was putting together pieces she'd worked so hard to scatter. People have their reasons. Yes, they do. And usually those reasons have names. His voice got quieter, which somehow made it more dangerous. I'm guessing your reason's name is Derek Collins. The name hit her like a physical blow. She turned to stare at him, her pulse suddenly loud in her ears. How? The Paris connection. You spent 6 months there in 2020 working on research. Derek Collins spent the same 6 months there according to his very detailed LinkedIn profile. Same university, same program, same time frame. Ethan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. He's also the founder and CEO of Pinnacle Financial, which coincidentally launched its first product line 3 months after you disappeared, a product line based on algorithmic trading platforms. Naomi couldn't breathe. The cold air felt like knives in her lungs. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? He shifted, turning to face her fully. Here's what I think happened. You and Derek worked together. Maybe you were more than colleagues. His social media suggests you were engaged for a while, though all those photos disappeared sometime in 2021. You did the research, built the algorithms, created something revolutionary, and then he took it, took everything, put his name on your work, pushed you out, and built an empire on your back. She wanted to deny it, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he didn't understand that it was more complicated than that, but the words wouldn't come, because he was right. He was exactly perfectly right. I'm tired, she heard herself say. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. I'm so tired of running from my own past. Ethan didn't say anything, just waited. 3 years. She laughed, but it came out broken. 3 years of looking over my shoulder, waiting for Derek Collins to finish what he started, waiting for him to destroy what's left of my life. She turned to look at Ethan, and something in her chest cracked open. He took my work, my research. 3 years of my life poured into those algorithms, and then he took my reputation, my finances, made sure every door in the industry slammed in my face. People think I'm a fraud, that I tried to steal credit for his work. He flipped the whole story and I couldn't. I had no way to fight back. Why not? Ethan's voice was gentle now, but his eyes were hard. Why didn't you fight? Because he's smart. Because he covered his tracks. Because by the time I realized what he'd done, he'd already rewritten history. She pulled her knees up to her chest, trying to make herself smaller. I had a lawyer look at it. Know what he told me, that Derek's contracts were airtight. That even though I created everything, the intellectual property technically belonged to the partnership we'd formed. The partnership Derek dissolved the day after the patents were filed with his name on them, not mine. Jesus. Ethan's jaw clenched. So he used you. Stole your work legally. Legally enough that I couldn't afford to fight it in court. Do you know how much IP litigation costs? I was 24 years old with student loans and no job. Derek had venture capital funding and a team of lawyers. She wiped at her eyes, angry to find them wet. So yeah, I ran. Changed my phone number, deleted my social media, took the first cash job I could find where nobody would ask questions. And I've been hiding ever since. The silence that followed felt heavy. Around them, campus life, continued students crossing the quad, someone playing guitar in the distance, the hum of the city beyond the gates. Normal life happening to normal people who hadn't had their futures stolen. Ethan pulled out his phone. Before Naomi could ask what he was doing, he'd hit a number and put it on speaker. Ethan. The voice that answered was smooth, professional, and made Naomi's blood run cold. I wasn't expecting to hear from you until our meeting next week. Derek. Ethan had called Derek Collins. Naomi grabbed his arm, shaking her head frantically, but Ethan's expression was stone. Change of plans, Derek. I have a question about your technical team. Specifically, I want to know about Naomi Carter. The pause on the other end of the line lasted exactly 3 seconds. I'm sorry, who? Naomi Carter, Columbia MBA 2021, spent 6 months in Paris working on algorithmic trading research. You worked together. Another pause. When Derek spoke again, his voice had shifted, still professional, but with an undertone of confusion that sounded almost genuine. The name sounds vaguely familiar. I think we might have been in a study group together, but I can't say I really knew her. Why? Naomi felt like she'd been punched. Study group. Like she'd been nothing. Like 3 years of her life, their engagement, everything they'd built together. Like it had all been erased with a few casual words. Just doing due diligence on the tech. Ethan's voice gave nothing away. Making sure all the IP is clean before we finalize the merger. Of course. But I can assure you everything at Pinnacle is thoroughly documented. Original research all properly attributed. We run a tight ship here. Derek's confidence was back now, smooth as glass. Was there anything else? No. That's all I needed to hear. Ethan ended the call and slipped his phone back into his pocket. When he looked at Naomi, his expression was something she couldn't quite read. Anger, maybe, or disgust, or something colder. He doesn't even remember me, she whispered. Her hands were shaking. 3 years of my life, and I'm just vaguely familiar. He remembers. Ethan's voice was flat. He knows exactly who you are. That pause, that careful deflection. He's been waiting for someone to ask that question. He stood, brushing off his jeans. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Naomi looked up at him, this billionaire who'd somehow inserted himself into her nightmare, and felt something shift. Maybe it was the way he'd said we. Or maybe it was the cold fury in his eyes that matched the anger she'd been carrying for 3 years. We. Her voice cracked on the word. Why would you help me? You're about to go into business with him. Ethan held out his hand. That's exactly why I'm going to help you. Because I don't do business with thieves. His fingers were warm when she took them, pulling her to her feet. And because nobody gets to destroy someone's life and pretend they don't remember their name. Standing there on the steps of Lowe Memorial Library, with her past spread out between them like broken glass, Naomi Carter made a choice. Maybe it was the wrong choice. Maybe she'd regret it. But for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't running alone. Okay, she said. Let's burn his empire to the ground. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a lobby wrapped in marble and quiet wealth. Naomi followed Ethan out her steps, slowing as she took in the space. This wasn't just an office building. This was a statement, a monument carved into Manhattan to remind the world exactly who controlled it. The Blackwood name gleamed on the wall behind the reception desk, its shadow stretching farther than she'd ever imagined. She'd never felt smaller. Come on, Ethan said over his shoulder. His tone wasn't sharp this time. It held something steadier, something she almost trusted. We'll talk in my office. Naomi forced her feet to keep moving. The receptionist greeted Ethan with the kind of polished warmth reserved for royalty and men who could buy the building they stood in. For her, the woman's smile flickered briefly, curiosity sparking and fading just as quickly. Naomi wasn't surprised. Nothing about her belonged here. Not her clothes, not her shoes, not the faint tremor she couldn't quite suppress. The elevator to the top floor rose silently. When the doors opened again, Naomi stepped into a different world. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined the entire far wall, and the city sprawled beneath them like a living map. Buildings shimmering under late autumn sunlight, traffic weaving through streets in shifting patterns of red and gold. The space was all dark wood, clean lines, polished surfaces, strength taste power, and Ethan Blackwood fit into it so effortlessly it hurt. Sit wherever you like, he said, hanging his coat over the back of a leather chair. Naomi stayed standing. This won't take long, she answered, her voice steadier than she felt. He turned toward her, slowly studying her with an expression she couldn't decipher. You think I brought you here so you could tell me what happens next? I think you brought me here because you're not used to people telling you no. Something sparked in his eyes, surprise, maybe even amusement, but the moment passed quickly. He walked to a side console, poured himself a glass of still water, then gestured at the city behind him. That, he said, is what I stand to lose. Naomi folded her arms. Then maybe you shouldn't be helping me. That's not how integrity works. The words landed harder than she expected. She'd forgotten what integrity looked like, forgotten what it sounded like when spoken by someone who actually meant it. Ethan set the glass down untouched and moved to his desk. A single keystroke lit up the screen, revealing a folder labeled Pinnacle Due Diligence. The sight alone made Naomi's throat tighten. "I've spent the last 48 hours reviewing every piece of documentation Derek Collins sent us," Ethan said. "Contracts, patent filings, research timelines, technical summaries." He paused, selecting several files with the flick of his wrist. "There's a pattern that shouldn't exist." He turned the screen toward her, and her world lurched. 27 patent applications filled the display, each stamped with the same filing window, 5 months and 18 days. Too fast, too dense, too complex for one man, much less a man whose academic record was built on glossy presentations rather than hard mathematics. "I don't understand," she whispered, though she did. She understood too well. "These are yours," Ethan said softly. Her knees weakened. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. He continued, his voice low but precise. "I pulled archived metadata from the patent office servers. It wasn't easy. Someone paid a lot of money to bury the original data, but not enough to erase everything." He tapped the screen lightly. "This system still remembers which digital signatures created the first drafts." Naomi's name glowed beside each document. Her initials marked every revision, every line of code. A tidal wave surged through her grief, shock, rage, vindication, all colliding so violently she had to close her eyes. He took everything," she said, her voice cracking. "He really took everything." "No." Ethan's tone sharpened, carrying a weight that pulled her gaze back to him. "He stole everything. And there's a difference." Naomi swallowed hard. "Why are you showing me this? Because you need to understand what we're dealing with. Derek isn't just a narcissist or a thief. He's systematic, calculated. He didn't just erase your name. He replaced it with his own, cleaned the paper trail, then built an empire on the ruins he left behind." "I know," she said quietly. "I lived it." "You lived the consequence," Ethan corrected, "not the scale." He opened another file. Naomi's breath hitched. Contract amendments, partnership dissolution documents. Revised agreements time-stamped exactly 6 months after she'd left, just as she'd told him. The signatures weren't hers. The digital trails weren't hers. But they pretended to be. "He forged all of this," she whispered, "and amended everything else to match." Her hands curled into fists. "I told people. I tried to warn them. I tried, I know." Ethan's voice softened. "And now I believe you." Something in Naomi's chest shifted at those words. A small, fragile weight lifting. Not everything, but enough. He stepped closer, not invading, but close enough that she could see how serious he was. "I'm not showing you this to reopen wounds. I'm showing you because you deserve the truth, and because I won't be part of a merger built on stolen work." Her head snapped up. "Ethan, if you walk away from this deal, you'll lose hundreds of millions of dollars." He shrugged with a calm that shouldn't have been possible. "Money is replaceable, and your reputation, investors don't like uncertainty. Reputation," he said, "is built on the choices people make when no one is watching." Her breath caught. The sincerity hit her harder than any anger could have. "You barely know me," she whispered. "Why would you risk this for me? I'm not doing it for you." The words were quiet, but they held a steady conviction. "I'm doing it because it's the right thing. You're just the person who reminded me why that matters." Naomi stood frozen. The city glowed behind her, golden and distant, as if belonging to another life. She hadn't expected this, not from him, not from anyone. Ethan stepped around his desk and picked up his phone. "There's someone I want you to meet." "Meet," she echoed. He dialed a number. "Daniel, it's Ethan. I need you at the office. Immediately." A pause. Ethan's jaw tightened in that way Naomi recognized now as the expression he wore when he'd already made a decision. "Yes," he said. "It's about Pinnacle, and I'm sending you everything we found." He hung up and faced her again. "Daniel Morrison," he said, "my attorney. He's the best in New York. If there's a way to expose Derek's fraud, he'll find it." Naomi shook her head, overwhelmed. "Ethan, I never asked for this." "No," he said gently, "but you deserve it all the same." She looked away, blinking back tears she hadn't meant to let fall. "I spent 3 years hiding, 3 years telling myself no one would ever believe me. I believe you." The words were simple, steady, no hesitation. Naomi pressed a hand to her chest, trying to contain the ache spreading beneath her ribs. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to fight someone like Derek." "You don't have to," Ethan said. "Not alone." She met his gaze, and for the first time she saw something unguarded in him, a vulnerability that mirrored the fear inside her. "Why?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. "Because no one should have to claw their way back from a betrayal like yours without someone at their side." Naomi inhaled shakily. "He'll come after you. Let him. You could lose everything. Then I lose it on my own terms." Her breath trembled. "I don't want you getting hurt because of me." "I'm not doing this because of you," he said, stepping closer. "I'm doing it because I can't imagine looking in the mirror knowing I chose profit over the truth." Silence filled the office, heavy but not suffocating. Naomi felt it settle into her bones, warm and frightening, and strangely liberating. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Ethan said, "we build a case." He turned back to the screen, flipping through files with practiced ease. "I want you to look at these with me. All 27 patents. Tell me what's missing. Tell me what he altered. Everything you can remember." Her pulse stuttered. "This will take hours." "Then we'll take hours. And if Derek finds out, he won't. Not yet." Naomi stepped toward the desk. Her reflection hovered faintly in the glass, a ghost of the woman she used to be. She took a slow, steady breath. "I'm ready." Ethan nodded once as if they'd sealed something neither of them fully understood yet. "Good," he said quietly, "because this is the moment everything changes." Naomi watched the screen brighten as he opened the first patent. Rows of text and code filled the display. Her work, her handwriting, her life. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel like she was drowning. She felt like she was resurfacing. She slid into the chair beside him. Ethan glanced at her, a hint of something warm in his eyes. "Let's begin," he said. "Dot." And they did. They worked until the sky outside Ethan's windows shifted from pale gold to a deep blue threaded with city lights. Naomi hadn't meant to lose track of time, but somewhere between the second patent file and the seventh clarity began to take shape. Every line she reviewed brought back a memory: late nights in Paris cafes, whiteboards covered in equations, Derek's voice promising they were building something that would change the industry. Now, inside Ethan's office, she could finally see the pattern of betrayal woven between the lines. At some point, Ethan stepped away to turn on a lamp, softening the room with warm light. It made the space feel less like a corporate empire and more like a sanctuary. When he returned to the desk, he didn't sit immediately. He studied her face, the curve of her brow pulled tight in concentration, the slight tremor in her fingers every time she recognized another stolen idea. "You should take a break," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "If I stop, I'll fall apart. You're stronger than you think." The words landed gently, but they caught her off guard. She blinked, her gaze drifting from the screen to his reflection in the window. "You say that like you know me." "I know enough," he replied. "I know what it looks like when someone keeps going long after most people would have collapsed." Naomi leaned back, exhaling slowly. Her shoulders ached. Her throat felt tight. "I can't believe I'm looking at all this again. It feels like touching a wound I spent years trying to pretend didn't exist." "It's more than a wound," Ethan said. "It's a theft, a violation, and you survived it even when you shouldn't have had to." She stared at him for a long moment, searching for the catch, the angle, the hidden motive. But all she saw was sincerity, unexpected, steady, unflinching. "Ethan, why are you so certain you barely know me?" He shook his head. "No, I know exactly what I need to know." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. "Do you remember the first moment I realized something was off about you?" "How could I forget?" Naomi managed a faint smile. "You were interrogating me over chocolate cake." "Not that moment," he said softly. "The moment before that. When Lucas tried to get my attention, I didn't even notice." "You did. And you didn't just notice him, you saw him. You saw a kid who couldn't ask for what he wanted, and you met him exactly where he was." Naomi blinked, surprised. "You think that's unusual?" "I think most adults ignore children when they're inconvenient," Ethan said, "especially children who communicate differently. But you didn't hesitate. You crossed whatever line you'd drawn around your own life because a boy you'd never met needed kindness." He paused, and something in his voice shifted from admiration to something softer. "People don't do that unless it's who they are at their core." She swallowed hard. Her chest felt tight again, but for a different reason. "Lucas is a sweet kid. He deserves better than being spoken for all the time." "I know," Ethan murmured, "and I haven't always done right by him. I get lost in work, in expectations, in trying to hold everything together." He leaned back, exhaling. Seeing how he lit up when you spoke to him, it made me realize how much he's been missing. How much I've been missing." Naomi looked down at her hands. "I wasn't trying to make an impression. I know. That's why you did." His gaze held hers steady and warm. "It told me everything I needed to know about your character. I trusted you long before I understood why." Her heart fluttered painfully. Something in the air shifted subtle but unmistakable, like the moment before a storm breaks, or the second a curtain lifts on a truth too big to ignore. "I don't feel like someone worth trusting," she whispered. Ethan shook his head slowly. "You are the one who created every piece of technology Derek used to build Pinnacle. You're the reason he has a company at all. You're the mind behind the breakthroughs he parades around as his own." His voice softened, as if he knew her instinct would be to shrink from praise. "You are the person worth fighting for, Naomi Carter." Her breath caught. The words, simple as they were, broke something open inside her. She'd spent so long convincing herself she didn't matter, because believing that hurt less than remembering what had been taken. She had no idea what to say. Thankfully, Ethan didn't seem to expect an answer. A soft vibration buzzed across the desk. Ethan glanced at his phone, and Naomi watched the shift in his expression, the slight hardening of his jaw, the faint tightening at the corner of his mouth. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up the phone, scrolling through a message that seemed to grow heavier with every second. Finally, he set the device down with care, as though it had become something dangerous. "It's Derek." Naomi felt her stomach lurch. "What does he want?" "He wants to move our meeting up," Ethan said slowly. "He's pushing for Sunday evening, says he has urgent updates about the merger." Naomi's pulse spiked. "He knows. Ethan, he knows we're looking into him." "I expected him to get nervous." Ethan replied, his voice calm but edged. "But this means he's preparing something, a trap." The word tasted bitter. "You can't go. I have to." His gaze locked on hers. "If I cancel, he'll know exactly what's wrong, and he'll go on the offensive." Naomi shook her head. "You don't understand what he's capable of. Derek doesn't just protect his secrets, he destroys anyone who threatens them." Ethan leaned toward her, folding his hands on the desk. "I'm not afraid of Derek Collins." "You should be," she said, her voice raw. "He ruined my life without even breaking a sweat, and I'm not going to let him do it again." His tone deepened, threading warmth and steel together. "Not to you." Her breath shuddered. "Ethan, I mean it." He stood slowly moving around the desk until he was beside her. "Whatever happens next, I won't let Derek Collins hurt you again." Naomi looked up, startled by the intensity in his voice. He wasn't making a promise out of bravado. He wasn't saving face or playing hero. He meant every word like it was an oath carved in stone. The room felt suddenly smaller, or maybe it was just the space between them. She stood too, even though her legs trembled. "Why are you doing this?" For a moment he didn't speak. He just looked at her, as if memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her breath hitched the shadows in her eyes she thought she'd hidden. Then softly, he said, "Because somewhere between trying to protect my company and trying to figure you out, I realized something I didn't expect." His voice lowered slow and careful, as though each word had weight. "I care about what happens to you, more than I should." Naomi's heart thudded once hard. He took a breath. "And because, if I'm being completely honest, He hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of reverence, as if saying it would change everything. His eyes held hers, steady, unwavering. "I think I'm falling for you, Naomi." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She felt the words settle over her skin, warm and terrifying in equal measure. He stepped closer, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the heat of him, the quiet sincerity in every breath he took. "I love you," he said, barely above a whisper. "I didn't plan on it. I didn't expect it. But it's the truth." The world seemed to stop. Naomi stared at him, her pulse racing the air thick with something she hadn't felt in years, hope fragile but real. She didn't trust her voice. She wasn't even sure she could speak without breaking. But she didn't look away. Couldn't. Outside the windows, the city glowed like a field of stars. Inside the office, the distance between them had never felt smaller. And for the first time since her life shattered, Naomi realized she wasn't entirely afraid. Not anymore. The coffee shop across from Ethan's building smelled like burnt espresso and old pastries. Naomi sat in the corner booth, her hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched, watching the entrance through the window. Her reflection stared back at her tired eyes, shoulders drawn tight, the kind of tension that lived in your bones after years of running. But something was different now. Something had shifted the night before in Ethan's office when he'd said those 3 impossible words. Her phone buzzed. Ethan's name lit up the screen. "Where are you?" His voice carried an edge she recognized now, not anger, but concern wrapped in command. "Café Noir, the one on 43rd. She watched a taxi splash through a puddle outside, water arcing into the gray morning air. I needed to think. A pause. She could almost hear him processing, calculating the distance between where she was and where he needed her to be. "Stay there. I'm coming down." "Ethan, I'm fine. I know what you're doing." His voice softened, but didn't lose its firmness. "You're second-guessing everything, running scenarios in your head about how this could go wrong, convincing yourself that walking away would be safer for everyone involved." Her throat tightened. How did he read her so easily? Maybe it would be. It wouldn't. The certainty in his tone left no room for argument. "Give me 5 minutes." He hung up before she could protest. Naomi set her phone down and stared at her coffee. The surface had gone cold, a thin film forming across the top. She thought about dumping it, ordering something fresh, but her hands felt too heavy to move. Last night kept replaying in her mind the way Ethan had looked at her when he said he loved her. The warmth that had flooded through her chest, terrifying and wonderful at the same time. She'd left before she could say anything back, fled his office like a coward because the idea of letting someone that close again made her want to crawl out of her own skin. The bell above the cafe door chimed. Ethan walked in, still wearing yesterday's jeans and cashmere sweater, his hair slightly mussed like he'd been running his hands through it. He spotted her immediately and crossed the space in 3 long strides, sliding into the booth across from her without asking. "You ran," he said. "Not an accusation, just a fact. I needed air. You needed distance." He leaned back, studying her with those gray eyes that saw too much. "From me. From what I said." Naomi's fingers tightened around her cup. "You caught me off guard. I meant every word. That's what scares me." The admission came out quieter than she intended. "Every time I let myself believe in someone, trust them, She stopped, swallowing hard. "Derek told me he loved me too. Right before he destroyed everything." Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed gentle. "I'm not Derek. I know that. Intellectually, I know that." She looked down at her hands. "But my brain knows things my heart can't seem to accept yet." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers, not grabbing, not demanding, just offering. "Then don't accept it yet. I'm not going anywhere." The simplicity of it made her chest ache. She turned her hand over, letting their palms touch, and felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders. "He's going to come after us, Ethan. After you. When Derek realizes what we're doing, he won't just walk away quietly." "I know." Ethan's thumb traced a slow circle against her wrist, "which is why we need to be smarter than him." How he's had years to build his defenses, legal teams, PR firms, investors who believe every word he says. Naomi pulled her hand back, frustration bleeding into her voice. "We have metadata and suspicion. That's not enough." "It's a start." Ethan's expression shifted, that calculating look she'd seen when he reviewed contracts, settling over his features. "But you're right. We need more than evidence. We need leverage." "What kind of leverage?" He pulled out his phone, scrolling through something before turning the screen toward her. An email chain time-stamped from early this morning. The subject line read, "Pinnacle Merger Technical Review Discrepancies." "I contacted 3 independent AI consultants last night," Ethan said. "Asked them to review the technical specifications Derek submitted for the merger. Told them I needed verification that the systems could integrate with our existing infrastructure." Naomi scanned the emails, her pulse quickening. What did they find? Inconsistencies, code fragments that don't match Derek's documented programming style, algorithm structures that suggest multiple authors, not one. Ethan leaned forward, his voice dropping. One of them flagged a section that's nearly identical to a paper published by a Columbia graduate student in 2020, a paper written by someone named N. Carter. Her breath caught. "I wrote that paper. It was part of my thesis research." "I know." His expression hardened. "Derek lifted entire sections of your academic work and embedded them into Pinnacle's proprietary systems. He didn't even bother changing the variable names." Rage flared hot in Naomi's chest. The audacity of it, the sheer laziness of assuming no one would ever look closely enough to notice. "So what do we do with this?" "We use it." Ethan's eyes gleamed with something dangerous. Derek wants to move our meeting up to Sunday. He thinks he's being proactive, getting ahead of whatever suspicions he's picked up on, but what he's actually doing is giving us an opportunity. An opportunity for what? To make him show his hand. Ethan set his phone aside and folded his hands on the table, every movement deliberate. I'm going to tell Derek that our technical team found anomalies in the IP documentation, that we need clarification from his head researcher before we can proceed. Naomi's stomach dropped. Ethan, he doesn't have a head researcher. He is the head researcher, at least on paper. Exactly. A ghost of a smile crossed Ethan's face, which means he'll have to either admit he can't explain his own work or he'll scramble to find someone who can cover for him. Either way, he'll be off balance, defensive, and people make mistakes when they're defensive. She shook her head slowly, pieces clicking into place. You want to force him into a corner. I want to create a situation where he has to choose between exposing his fraud or doubling down on his lies. Ethan's voice was steady, calculated. And when he chooses to double down, because men like Derek always do, we'll have witnesses, documentation, proof that he can't substantiate his own supposed genius. Naomi's mind raced. It was risky, so risky. But it was also the first real plan she'd heard in 3 years that didn't involve her hiding or running or disappearing. What if he brings in someone else, pays them to back up his story? Then we pivot. Ethan's confidence was absolute. But I don't think he will. Derek's ego won't let him admit he needs help, especially not in front of me. He'll want to maintain the illusion of control right up until it shatters. She wanted to argue, wanted to point out the 1,000 ways this could go wrong. But when she looked at Ethan, at the determination in his eyes, the set of his jaw, she realized something that made her chest tighten. He wasn't doing this because it was good business. He was doing this because Derek had hurt her, and that mattered to him more than money or mergers or risk. You really meant it, she said quietly. Last night, when you said, I meant it. He didn't let her finish. Every word. The cafe buzzed around them, espresso machines, hissing conversations, blending into white noise. But in their corner booth, the world felt suspended. Naomi looked at this man who'd somehow inserted himself into her nightmare and turned it into something that looked almost like hope. Okay, she said, let's do it. Let's make Derek show everyone who he really is. Ethan's expression softened, something warm flickering behind the steel. There's one more thing. What? When we walk into that meeting on Sunday, you're not going as my guest. You're not going as a witness. He held her gaze, unwavering. You're going as Dr. Naomi Carter, independent consultant, the expert I've brought in to verify Pinnacle's technical claims. Her heart stopped. Ethan, I can't. Derek will recognize me immediately. That's the point. His voice was gentle but firm. You've spent 3 years hiding, making yourself smaller, letting him win by default. But you're not that person anymore. He reached across the table again, this time taking her hand fully in his. You're the woman who built something revolutionary, who survived betrayal and came out the other side. And it's time Derek Collins looked you in the eye and realized he didn't break you. Tears pricked at Naomi's eyes. She blinked them back, but one escaped anyway, tracking down her cheek. Ethan's thumb caught it before it could fall, his touch impossibly gentle. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. He squeezed her hand. But you're not alone anymore. Not ever again. She believed him. God help her, she actually believed him. All right. Naomi straightened her shoulders, feeling something click into place. Some piece of herself she'd thought Derek had taken forever. Let's stop running. Ethan smiled, then a real smile that softened the hard edges of his face. There's the woman who argued with me over chocolate cake. Despite everything, Naomi laughed. It came out shaky, but it was real. That feels like a lifetime ago. It was 4 days ago. Has it really only been 4 days? She shook her head, marveling at how thoroughly her life had been upended in less than a week. It feels longer. The good things usually do. Ethan stood, pulling her up with him. Come on. We have a lot of work to do before Sunday, and I want you to meet Daniel before we finalize the strategy. Naomi let him lead her out of the cafe and into the cold morning air. Across the street, Blackwood Tower rose into the gray sky, its windows reflecting clouds and possibility. She thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago, brilliant and naive, believing that talent and hard work were enough. Then she thought about the woman she'd become, scarred and cautious, but still standing, still fighting. And now, for the first time, she had someone fighting beside her. The 32nd floor of the Pinnacle Financial Building was all glass and chrome, designed to impress investors and intimidate competitors. Naomi stood in the elevator beside Ethan, watching the numbers climb, each one, bringing them closer to the confrontation she'd spent 3 years trying to avoid. Her reflection in the polished doors looked pale, her hands clasped too tightly in front of her. She'd dressed carefully that morning, a navy suit she'd bought years ago when she still believed she had a future. Her hair pulled back in a way that made her look older, more professional, more like someone who belonged in rooms like this. Ethan touched her elbow as the elevator slowed. You ready? No, she wasn't ready. She'd never be ready to face Derek Collins again. But ready didn't matter anymore. Let's get this over with. The doors slid open to reveal a reception area that screamed new money, trying to look like old money. Marble floors, abstract art that probably cost more than Naomi had earned in her entire life, a receptionist whose smile was as polished as the furniture. The woman's eyes flicked from Ethan to Naomi, something calculating in her expression before professional warmth settled back into place. Mr. Blackwood, Dr. Carter, Mr. Collins is expecting you. Conference room 3, just down the hall to your right. Dr. Carter. Ethan had called ahead with her credentials, establishing her role before they'd even arrived. The legitimacy of it felt strange on her skin after years of hiding. They walked down a hallway lined with photos of Derek at various industry events, shaking hands with senators and tech giants, always positioned at the center of every frame. Naomi's stomach churned. She'd been in some of those photos once cropped out so thoroughly, it was like she'd never existed. Ethan's hand found the small of her back as they approached the conference room, not possessive, just steadying, reminding her she wasn't alone. The door opened before they could knock, and there he was. Derek Collins looked exactly the same, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that photographed strong jaw, clear eyes, the suggestion of warmth that never quite reached the truth. He wore a suit that probably cost what Naomi made in 6 months at Leonard's, his smile wide and welcoming as he extended his hand to Ethan. Ethan, good to see you. Thank you for accommodating the schedule change. His voice was smooth, practiced every syllable designed to inspire confidence. I know Sunday isn't ideal, but with the Q1 deadline approaching, I wanted to make sure we had time to address any concerns. Of course. Ethan shook his hand with the ease of someone who'd been doing this since birth. I appreciate your flexibility, and I'd like to introduce Dr. Naomi Carter, the independent technical consultant I mentioned. Derek's gaze shifted to her. 3 seconds. That's how long it took. 3 seconds of his eyes meeting hers, recognition flickering like lightning across his face before his expression smoothed into polished neutrality. Dr. Carter. He extended his hand to her, and Naomi felt her entire body go rigid. A pleasure. She forced herself to take his hand. His palm was warm, his grip firm, and touching him again after 3 years felt like putting her hand into a fire. She pulled away as quickly as politeness allowed. Mr. Collins! Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. Small victories. If Derek was rattled, he hid it perfectly. He gestured them into the conference room, where a long table dominated the space, floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a view of Manhattan that rivaled Ethan's. A presentation was already loaded on the screen at the far end, graphs and projections all designed to show Pinnacle's meteoric rise. Please sit. Derek moved to the head of the table, like he owned not just the room, but the air inside it. Can I get either of you anything, coffee, water? We're fine. Ethan's tone was pleasant but dismissive. He pulled out a chair for Naomi before taking his own seat, positioning them across from Derek with the kind of strategic awareness that suggested he'd done this 1,000 times. Why don't we get started? You mentioned urgent updates. Right. Derek pulled up a slide showing merger projections. I wanted to walk you through our Q4 performance. We've exceeded every benchmark, and the integration timeline we discussed is still on track. However, I understand you had some questions about our technical infrastructure. Not questions exactly. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed in a way that somehow made him look more dangerous. Clarifications. My team ran a compatibility analysis on the systems we'll be integrating, and we found some inconsistencies in the documentation. Derek's smile didn't waver. Inconsistencies. Code architecture that doesn't match the attributed authorship. Algorithm structures that suggest collaborative development rather than single-source creation. Ethan paused, letting the words settle. That's why I brought Dr. Carter. She specializes in algorithmic trading systems and financial technology platforms. I need her to verify that what we're buying actually works the way you've claimed." Something flickered in Derek's eyes just for a second, like a crack in glass before it shatters, but his voice stayed smooth. "Of course. I'm happy to walk through any technical specifications. Though I'm curious, Dr. Carter, what's your background in this particular field?" Naomi met his gaze directly. "I have a Columbia MBA with a focus on financial systems and technology. I spent several years developing algorithmic trading platforms, including 6 months conducting research in Paris." She watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "I'm quite familiar with the kind of work Pinnacle has been doing." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Derek's smile had frozen in place, but his eyes were calculating, trying to figure out how much she'd told Ethan how much danger he was actually in. "Columbia, small world. I don't suppose we crossed paths during our time there." "I don't suppose we did." Naomi's voice was ice. "Though I did notice that several of Pinnacle's core algorithms bear a striking resemblance to research published by Columbia graduate students around 2020, particularly work focused on predictive modeling and high-frequency trading optimization." Derek's hand tightened around his pen. "Academic research is often foundational to practical application. That's how innovation works." "Absolutely." Ethan's voice cut in smooth as silk. "Which is why we'd like you to walk us through the development process. Dr. Carter has some specific questions about the authorship documentation." "I'd be happy to." Derek stood moving to the presentation screen like he was buying time to think. "Though I'm not sure what you're implying. Every piece of intellectual property at Pinnacle has been thoroughly documented and legally verified." Naomi opened her briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were printouts of the patent applications Ethan had shown her, the ones with her digital signature still buried in the metadata. She slid them across the table toward Derek. "These are the patent filings for Pinnacle's core technology," she said. 27 applications submitted over a 5-month period. That's an impressive pace for a single researcher." Derek glanced at the documents, and for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, panic crossed his face. "I had a team helping with the documentation and filing process." "But the research itself was yours," Naomi pressed. "Yes." His voice was firmer, now defensive. "The foundational work, the breakthrough algorithms, that was all mine." "Then you'll be able to explain the technical specifications." Naomi pulled out another sheet, this one showing code fragments from one of the patents. "This section, for example, it's using a recursive optimization method that's quite sophisticated. Can you walk me through the logic?" Derek stared at the code. She watched him scan the lines, saw the exact moment he realized he didn't understand what he was looking at. He'd stolen her work so completely that he'd never bothered to actually learn how it functioned. "This is proprietary information," he said slowly. "I'm not comfortable discussing specific implementation details without proper NDAs in place." "We have NDAs." Ethan's voice was quiet but sharp. "You signed them 2 months ago when we started merger negotiations." "Right. Of course." Derek set the paper down his fingers, leaving slight impressions on the page. "What I mean is this level of technical detail is something I'd prefer to discuss with my full engineering team present. These systems are complex, and I want to make sure any explanation is comprehensive." Naomi tilted her head. "But you developed them. Surely you can explain your own work." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Derek's mask was cracking, now hairline fractures spreading across his composure. "Dr. Carter, I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish here, but I've built Pinnacle from the ground up. Every innovation, every breakthrough was stolen." The words came out before Naomi could stop them, sharp and clear and final. Derek froze. Ethan didn't move, but she could feel the tension radiating from him, coiled and ready. "Excuse me." Derek's voice went cold. Naomi stood her hands flat on the table, every year of fear and shame and rage crystallizing into this single moment. "You heard me. Every piece of technology Pinnacle is built on every algorithm you've claimed as your own genius. You stole it from me." The conference room went silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence that settles during a pause in conversation, but the suffocating kind that precedes an explosion. Derek's face had gone pale, then red color rising up his neck like a thermometer measuring rage. "That's a serious accusation." His voice was dangerously quiet, controlled in a way that suggested violence barely restrained. I'm not sure what kind of game you're playing, Dr. Carter, but I'd be very careful about making defamatory statements in front of witnesses. Naomi didn't flinch. 3 years ago, that tone would have made her fold, made her apologize, made her small enough to disappear. But she wasn't that woman anymore. It's not defamation if it's true. Ethan stood slowly, drawing Derek's attention. I think we should all sit down and discuss this rationally. There's nothing to discuss. Derek's hands were shaking now just slightly, the only visible crack in his armor. I don't know what she told you, Ethan, but this woman is clearly unstable. She's making wild claims about work that has been legally documented, verified by independent auditors, and stolen from its original creator. Ethan's voice cut through Derek's protest like a blade. Naomi Carter holds the intellectual property rights to 27 patents that Pinnacle Financial currently claims as proprietary technology. Derek let out a laugh that sounded more like a bark. That's absurd. I've never even met this woman before today. Really? Naomi reached into her briefcase again, this time pulling out a photograph. Her hands trembled as she slid it across the polished conference table, but her voice stayed steady. This is from the Pinnacle launch event 3 years ago. That's you giving the keynote speech about revolutionary financial technology. And that's me standing beside you wearing the engagement ring you gave me 6 months earlier in Paris. The photograph sat between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Derek stared at it, and for the first time his mask completely shattered. She watched him cycle through responses' denial rage calculation before landing on something that looked almost like desperation. We dated briefly, he said, his voice carefully modulated, now trying to regain control. It ended badly. She became obsessed, started making claims about my work, trying to insert herself into my success. I had to get a restraining order. You never got a restraining order. Naomi's voice was ice. You know why? Because that would have required court filings, public records evidence. And you couldn't risk anyone looking too closely at the timeline. Couldn't risk them noticing that Pinnacle's first patent applications were filed exactly 6 days after you dissolved our research partnership. Partnership. Derek seized on the word. So you admit we had a partnership, which means any work done during that time was collaborative, joint intellectual property. It would have been, Ethan interjected, if the partnership dissolution documents hadn't been forged, if Naomi's signatures hadn't been fabricated, if you hadn't systematically removed her name from every piece of documentation after she left the company. Derek's jaw clenched. You can't prove any of that. Actually, we can. Ethan pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. I had my forensic IT team examine the original patent filings. They found something interesting in the metadata. Every single document was created and edited by a user account registered to Naomi Carter. The digital signatures, the timestamps, the revision histories, all of it points to her as the original author. He swiped to another screen. Then, 6 months after Naomi left Pinnacle, someone accessed those files and modified them, changed the author attribution, altered the partnership agreements, created a paper trail that made it look like you'd been the sole creator all along. Ethan looked up, his gray eyes hard as stone, but they forgot to scrub the cloud backups. The originals still exist, Derek. Every line of code, every algorithm, every breakthrough, all documented with Naomi's credentials embedded in the file architecture. The color had drained from Derek's face. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for air. Those files are protected by attorney-client privilege. No, they're not. A new voice came from the doorway. Daniel Morrison stepped into the conference room, a leather portfolio under one arm, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes sharp. Attorney-client privilege doesn't extend to documents used in the commission of fraud, Mr. Collins. And what you've done here qualifies as fraud on multiple levels, intellectual property theft, forgery, falsification of business records, and breach of fiduciary duty. Derek stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I want my lawyer present before this conversation continues. Of course. Daniel set his portfolio on the table and extracted a thick document, sliding it toward Derek with the kind of precision that suggested he'd done this many times before. But before you make that call, you should know that we've already filed a formal complaint with the Patent and Trademark Office. We've also submitted our findings to the SEC, given Pinnacle's recent IPO and the material misrepresentations in your prospectus. Derek grabbed the document, his hands shaking as he scanned the first page. This is... You can't just, Ethan, we had a deal. A merger worth hundreds of millions. Had. Ethan's voice was flat. Past tense. As of 30 minutes ago, Blackwood Industries has formally withdrawn from all merger negotiations with Pinnacle Financial. The letter of termination cites material misrepresentation and fraudulent inducement as grounds for immediate dissolution of our agreement. You'll be sued for breach of contract. Derek's voice was rising now, control slipping away with every word. I'll take everything you have. You can try. Ethan moved around the table, positioning himself between Derek and Naomi. But our contract had a specific clause about intellectual property verification. If any patents or proprietary technology included in the merger were found to be based on stolen or disputed IP, either party could terminate without penalty. You signed it yourself, Derek. Page 47, paragraph 12. Derek stared at him, and Naomi watched the exact moment reality crashed through his defenses. He'd been so confident, so certain that his careful construction of lies would hold forever. He'd never considered that someone might actually look beneath the surface. This is her fault. Derek turned to Naomi, pointing at her with a shaking finger. She poisoned you against me, fed you lies about work she barely contributed to. I made Pinnacle what it is. I built this company from nothing. You built it from my work. Naomi's voice rang clear through the conference room. From my 3 years of research. From the algorithms I developed in Paris while you were networking at conferences and taking credit for ideas you didn't understand. You built it from my late nights, my breakthroughs, my innovation. She stepped forward, and Derek actually stepped back. And then you tried to erase me, changed my name to yours on every document, rewrote history so completely that you convinced yourself it was true. I gave you opportunities. Derek's voice cracked. I introduced you to investors. I marketed your work. Without me, those algorithms would have stayed academic papers that nobody read. You took my name off those papers. The words came out quiet, but devastating. You presented my research as yours at conferences while I was still writing the code. You told people I was just a research assistant, someone who helped with data entry. Naomi's hands clenched into fists. And when I finally confronted you, when I said I wanted credit for my own work, you told me I was being ungrateful, emotional, that I didn't understand how the business world worked. Because you didn't. Derek's mask was completely gone now, replaced with naked contempt. You were brilliant in a lab, Naomi, but you had no idea how to monetize your work. No idea how to talk to investors, how to build a company, how to turn theory into profit. I did that. I made your research matter. You made it yours. She was close enough now to see the sweat on his forehead, the slight tremor in his jaw. You stole my work. You stole my reputation. You stole 3 years of my life and then discarded me like I was nothing, like I never existed. You weren't nothing. Derek's voice dropped and something almost like regret flickered across his face. You were just in the way of something bigger than both of us. The honesty of it, the casual cruelty made Naomi's breath catch. This was who Derek Collins really was. Not a villain who reveled in causing pain, but something worse. Someone who genuinely believed that his ambition justified any cost, any betrayal, any destruction of the people who'd helped him build his empire. I want to hear you say it. Naomi's voice shook, but she didn't back down. I want you to admit out loud with witnesses what you did. Derek looked at her, then at Ethan, then at Daniel Morrison, who stood by the door like a sentinel guarding the exit. I don't have to admit anything. No, you don't. Ethan's voice was cold, but the evidence speaks for itself. And when the SEC finishes their investigation, when the Patent Office reviews the forensic documentation, when your investors realize they've been funding a company built on stolen IP, you won't need to admit anything. The truth will bury you all on its own. Derek's face went ashen. You're destroying my company, everything I've built. You did that yourself. Naomi found herself moving closer, close enough that Derek had to look down to meet her eyes. You fired the first shot 3 years ago when you erased my name from work I created. You destroyed my career, my reputation, my finances. You made me afraid to even use my own credentials because you'd poison the industry against me. Her voice strengthened with each word. But here's what you didn't count on, Derek. You didn't break me. You tried. God knows you tried. But I survived. And this time, you're going to be the one who loses everything. The silence that followed felt like the moment before a building collapses, that brief suspension where physics catches up to structure and everything comes crashing down. Derek stood there, his expensive suit suddenly looking too big for him, his carefully constructed persona crumbling like ash. "This isn't over," he said, but the words had no strength behind them. "Yes, it is." Ethan's voice carried absolute finality. "The merger is terminated. The fraud investigation is underway. And in approximately 48 hours, every major business publication in the country is going to run a story about how Pinnacle Financial's technology was built on stolen intellectual property. Your investors will pull funding, your board will demand your resignation, and every door that slammed in Naomi's face 3 years ago will slam in yours." Derek looked at Naomi one last time, and she saw something she'd never expected to see in his eyes: fear, real, genuine fear. "You have no idea what you've done," he whispered. "I know exactly what I've done." Naomi felt something shift in her chest, like chains she'd worn for 3 years, finally breaking free. "I've taken back what was mine, my work, my reputation, my future, and I've made sure you'll never steal from anyone else again." Daniel Morrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Collins, I strongly suggest you contact your legal counsel. The SEC will want to interview you within the next 72 hours, and given the severity of the allegations, you'll want representation present." Derek grabbed his phone from the table with shaking hands. He looked at Naomi, at Ethan, at the documents spread across the conference table that outlined his fraud in meticulous detail. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway until they faded into nothing. The door clicked shut behind him, and suddenly the air in the conference room felt breathable again. Naomi's legs gave out. She grabbed the edge of the table, her vision swimming the weight of 3 years crashing over her all at once. Ethan was there immediately, his arm around her waist, steadying her before she could fall. "I've got you," he said quietly. "You're okay. You did it." She looked up at him, and the emotion that flooded through her was too big to name. Relief, vindication, grief for the years she'd lost joy at finally being seen, being believed, being free. "Is it really over?" "The investigation will take time," Daniel said, gathering his documents with efficient movements. "But Collins won't recover from this. The evidence is too solid. Within 6 months, Pinnacle will likely file for bankruptcy, and Derek will be facing criminal charges for fraud and forgery. 6 months, half a year to undo 3 years of lies. It seemed too fast, too simple after everything she'd endured. But when Naomi looked at the papers scattered across the table, her name, her work, her truth finally visible again, she realized it wasn't simple at all. It was justice. Slow and painful and hard-won, but justice nonetheless. "Thank you," she said to Daniel, her voice rough, "for believing me, for fighting for me." Daniel's expression softened slightly. "I didn't do it for you, Dr. Carter. I did it because fraud offends me on a professional level. But I'm glad the outcome benefits you nonetheless." He nodded to Ethan. "I'll have a full report on your desk by tomorrow morning. The termination paperwork is already filed with the appropriate regulatory bodies." He left, and suddenly it was just Naomi and Ethan in the vast conference room, surrounded by evidence of Derek's fraud and the ruins of his carefully constructed empire. "I can't believe it's over," Naomi whispered. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to find a way to twist this to make me the villain again." "He can't." Ethan turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Not anymore. You have documentation, witnesses, legal protection, and you have me." His voice dropped. "I meant what I said, Naomi. I won't let Derek Collins hurt you again." She believed him. For the first time in 3 years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was actually safe. "What happens now?" she asked. Ethan smiled a real smile that reached his eyes and softened the hard edges of his face. "Now you rebuild. You take back your name. You use your credentials without fear. You create whatever you want to create without looking over your shoulder. And you," her heart was beating too fast. "What happens with us?" His smile turned gentle. "That's up to you. I've already told you how I feel. But you've just taken back your life, Naomi. I'm not going to pressure you into anything before you're ready." She looked at him. This man who'd believed her when no one else would, who'd risked his business reputation to help her, who'd stood beside her while she faced down the monster who'd nearly destroyed her. And she realized something that made her chest tight with emotion. "I'm ready," she said. "I've been ready since you told me you loved me. I was just too scared to admit it." Ethan's eyes searched hers. And now I'm still scared. She reached up her fingers, brushing his jaw. But I'm also free, and I don't want to waste any more time hiding from things that matter. He kissed her then, soft and careful and full of promise. And for the first time in 3 years, Naomi Carter let herself feel something other than fear. 6 months later, the headlines had finally stopped. Naomi stood in the kitchen of Ethan's Tribeca penthouse, morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Hudson River. She'd stopped being surprised by the view weeks ago, though she still caught herself pausing sometimes to take it in the way the water reflected gold in early morning. The Statue of Liberty visible in the distance, the city spreading out like proof that she'd survived, that she'd made it to the other side. Her phone buzzed on the marble counter, a news alert. She almost didn't check it. She'd trained herself to ignore the constant stream of updates about Derek's trial, about Pinnacle's collapse, about the industry fallout. But something made her pick it up anyway. Former tech CEO Derek Collins sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for fraud and IP theft. She read the headline twice, then set the phone down with steady hands. 5 years. It seemed like such a small number for what he'd done for the lives he'd destroyed. But it was something. Justice, even imperfect justice, was something. "You okay?" Ethan's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him in the doorway, Lucas beside him, both of them wearing matching expressions of concern. "Yeah." She smiled and meant it. Derek got sentenced. 5 years. Lucas's hands moved quickly, signing, "Is that good?" Naomi signed back, "It's closure, and that's better than good." The boy grinned and ran over to hug her, his small arms wrapping around her waist with the kind of uncomplicated affection that still sometimes made her eyes sting. Over the past 6 months, Lucas had become a constant in her life, afternoons spent teaching him advanced sign language weekends, exploring museums, quiet evenings, watching him do homework while she worked on her laptop. She'd never planned to become important to this kid, but somewhere along the way, he'd become important to her too. "Breakfast?" Ethan asked, moving to the stove, where pancakes were already warming. "You cooked?" Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Should I be concerned?" "Dad's pancakes are terrible," Lucas signed with exaggerated drama. "But we eat them anyway because we love him." Ethan laughed, the sound warm and unguarded in a way that still surprised her sometimes. "My pancakes are perfectly adequate, thank you very much." They sat together at the kitchen island, the three of them falling into the comfortable rhythm they'd developed over months of shared meals and shared life. Naomi listened to Lucas talk in sign and occasional spoken words he was practicing about his upcoming science fair project, about a friend from school, about normal 10-year-old concerns that had nothing to do with fraud or betrayal or corporate espionage. It felt almost surreal. This life, this peace. After breakfast, Lucas disappeared into his room to video call a friend, and Naomi found herself alone with Ethan in the living room. He'd been quieter than usual this morning, something thoughtful in his expression that she couldn't quite read. "What's on your mind?" she asked, curling up on the couch beside him. "How's Carter Technologies doing?" He deflected, but gently. She let him. Q1 profits exceeded projections by 18%. We've got 3 new clients signing on next month, and I'm finalizing the patent applications for the updated algorithm architecture. She paused, still getting used to saying it out loud. "It's real, Ethan. I have a company. My own company. Built on my own work. You deserve it." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "All of it." 6 months ago, with Ethan's financial backing and Daniel Morrison's legal guidance, Naomi had founded Carter Technologies, a financial systems consulting firm built on the very algorithms Derek had stolen. The irony was delicious. The vindication was better. Within 3 months, she'd had more client requests than she could handle. Within 5, she'd hired a small team. Now Carter Technologies was profitable, growing, and entirely hers. The industry had welcomed her back with a mixture of apology and enthusiasm. Turns out, when a billionaire like Ethan Blackwood vouches for you, when forensic evidence proves you were the victim of fraud, when major publications run stories about the brilliant innovator who'd been silenced, doors open pretty quickly. "I got a call yesterday," Naomi said. "Columbia wants me to give a guest lecture series on algorithmic trading and financial technology innovation." Ethan pulled back to look at her. "That's incredible. Are you going to do it?" "I think so." She smiled. "Feels like closing a circle, Going back to where it all started, but this time on my own terms. You've come a long way from serving tables at Leonard's. Don't remind me." She laughed, but it wasn't bitter anymore, just distant, like remembering a life that belonged to someone else. "Linda called last week, actually. Asked if I wanted my old job back. Apparently, they're short-staffed." Ethan's eyebrows rose. "What did you say?" "I told her I'd give her a consulting rate if she wanted help optimizing their reservation and ordering systems." Naomi grinned. "She hung up on me." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the city humming beyond the windows, the future spreading out before them like uncharted territory. Then Ethan stood abruptly. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." He led her out onto the terrace, a space she'd only been to a handful of times, mostly because the December air was freezing, and she'd never been one for unnecessary cold. But today the sun was bright, warming the stone beneath their feet, and the view was breathtaking enough to make the temperature bearable. Ethan stood at the railing, looking out over the city. "Do you remember the first time we had a real conversation at Columbia? On the library steps, you ambushed me with evidence of Derek's fraud. I told you I don't do business with thieves." He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "But I didn't tell you the whole truth." Naomi's breath caught. "What truth?" "That somewhere between trying to protect my company and trying to understand who you really were, I realized I'd found something I didn't know I was looking for." He reached into his pocket, and Naomi's entire world seemed to slow. "You taught me that integrity matters more than profit, that standing up for what's right is worth more than any merger or deal or business opportunity." He pulled out a small velvet box, and Naomi couldn't breathe. "You made me want to be a better man," Ethan said softly. "A better father, a better person. Not because you demanded it, but because seeing the world through your eyes made me realize how much I'd compromised, how much I'd accepted as normal, that was actually just hollow." He opened the box, revealing a simple solitaire diamond that caught the morning light and scattered it into rainbows. "Naomi Carter, you are the most brilliant, courageous, resilient person I've ever met. You survived something that would have destroyed most people, and you came out the other side stronger. You built something beautiful from the ashes of what was stolen from you. And you did it with grace and integrity and a kindness that still amazes me." His voice roughened with emotion. "I love you completely, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that not all powerful men are like Derek Collins, that you can trust me with your heart, your dreams, your future." He dropped to one knee, and Naomi's vision blurred with tears. "Will you marry me?" The words hung in the cold December air, precious and perfect, and more than she'd ever let herself hope for. Naomi looked at this man who'd believed her when no one else would, who'd fought for her, who'd stood beside her through the worst and stayed for the best. She thought about Lucas inside, probably watching from a window. She thought about Carter Technologies, about Columbia, about the life she'd rebuilt from nothing. She thought about Derek in a federal prison, finally paying for his crimes. She thought about 3 years of running, of hiding, of being afraid. And then she thought about the future, about possibility, about love that didn't come with conditions or betrayal, about partnership that meant actual partnership, not theft disguised as collaboration. "Yes," the word came out steady and sure. "I trust you, Ethan, completely." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a kind of reverence that made her feel like something precious, something worth protecting. When they finally broke apart, she was laughing and crying at the same time. "I can't believe this is real," she whispered against his chest. "Believe it." His arms tightened around her. "You're not running anymore, Naomi. You're home." From inside the apartment, she heard Lucas shout a sound of pure joy, and then the boy was bursting through the terrace doors, signing frantically. "Did she say yes? Are you getting married? Am I getting a mom?" Naomi knelt down to his level, her heart so full it hurt. "If that's okay with you." Lucas threw his arms around her neck, nodding so hard she could feel it. When he pulled back, his hands moved carefully. "Can we go to Paris for the honeymoon? Dad said you loved Paris before it got ruined. Maybe we can make new memories that don't hurt." She looked up at Ethan, who shrugged with a smile. "I may have mentioned that not every connection to Paris needs to end in heartbreak." "Paris sounds perfect." Naomi managed her voice thick with emotion. "We can make entirely new memories. Happy ones." They went inside, Lucas already planning the wedding in elaborate detail through rapid-fire sign language, Ethan laughing and trying to moderate his son's expectations. Naomi stood for a moment on the threshold, looking back at the city that had witnessed her fall and her rise, her destruction and her rebuilding. 5 years ago, she'd been a brilliant graduate student with the world at her feet. 3 years ago, Derek had stolen that world and left her with nothing. 6 months ago, she'd walked into a conference room and taken it all back. And now she had her own company, her own reputation, her own future. She had a man who loved her for who she was, not what she could give him. She had a kid who looked at her like she hung the moon. She had justice, vindication, and peace. She had everything Derek had tried to take, and so much more. Naomi Carter stepped inside, closed the terrace door behind her, and let herself believe what she'd thought was impossible for so long. She was safe. She was loved. She was free. And she was never ever going to let anyone make her invisible again.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.